Get out of my car. Now. Dante Caruso's voice cut through the Rolls Royce like a blade. He didn't look at Elise Harmon. He didn't need to. His finger pointed at the curb like a judge delivering a death sentence. Mr. Caruso. I said out. I don't repeat myself. Ever. Elise's hands froze on the steering wheel. 6 hours. She'd lasted 6 hours before the most dangerous man in New York showed his true colors. Her son's face flashed through her mind. Noah, waiting at home, believing Mommy's new job would finally save them. She didn't get out. No, that single word would either get her killed or give her everything she never knew she needed. If this story satisfies you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Dante didn't move. He didn't get out into the downpour, and he didn't let her leave either. The silence inside the Rolls Royce became a weapon, sharper than the rain drumming on the roof. He leaned forward, his shadow looming over Elise, until she could feel the heat radiating from his suppressed rage. "Look at me, Elise," he commanded, his voice a low vibration that mirrored the thunder outside. She didn't move. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I said, "Look at me. We are going to settle this right here, like adults." Slowly, Elise turned. In the dim glow of the dashboard, his eyes weren't just cold, they were predatory. They were inches apart, trapped in a bubble of leather and luxury while the world outside vanished behind a curtain of water. He didn't need the rain to look dangerous. The quiet fury in his gaze was enough to drown her. Dante shoved his door open and stepped out into the deluge. He didn't look back, but his silence was a command. Elise took a trembling breath, killed the engine, and followed him. They faced each other on an empty sidewalk. The rain pounded. Streetlights cast a faint yellow glow over two figures from two different worlds. Neither of them looked away first. "Do you know why you were the 47th person to apply for this job?" Dante asked, his voice calm, as if they were standing in a living room and not in the middle of a downpour. Elise answered without hesitation. "Because you fired 46 people." "Wrong." Dante tilted his head, studying her. "Because 46 people quit. They couldn't take the pressure. They couldn't stand being ordered around by someone like me. They couldn't stand the truth that in my world, one mistake can mean death." "I don't make mistakes, Mr. Caruso. You took the wrong route." "No, I took a different route." Elise drew a deep breath. 20 minutes before picking you up, I heard the police radio. They were carrying out a raid on 5th Avenue, the exact route you wanted to take. If I followed your instructions, this Rolls Royce would have been stopped. The cameras would have recorded it. The police would have checked documents. And I don't think you want that kind of attention." Silence. The rain kept falling. Dante stared at her without blinking. His face held no expression, but something shifted in his eyes. She had just saved him without realizing it. A raid, cameras, the press. If Dante Caruso showed up on the evening news tonight, sitting in a car stopped by the police, everything he'd built would tremble. And this woman, this driver who'd been on the job for 6 hours, had prevented it. "You listened to the police radio?" Dante repeated slowly. "Old habit," Elise said. "My husband used to be a cop. He always kept the radio on when he drove. I learned it from him. Used to be. He died 2 years ago. A car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light." Her voice didn't shake, but something broke in her eyes when she mentioned her husband. "Since then, I've been raising my child alone. Noah, my son, 7 years old." Dante said nothing. "I used to be a forensic accountant," Elise went on. 8 years of experience at Morrison & Associates. Specialized in detecting financial fraud, but the company downsized 6 months ago, and I was one of the people they let go. Since then, I've applied to more than 100 jobs. No one called back. Bills keep piling up. Rent is 3 weeks overdue. I have $23 in my bank account. She paused, drew a shaky breath. "So when I saw your posting, the job no one wants, I applied. Not because I'm brave, because I'm desperate. There's a difference, Mr. Caruso." Dante remained silent. Rain streamed down his face like tears he would never shed. "I'm not afraid of you," Elise said plainly. "I'm afraid of failing my son. I'm afraid of looking into Noah's eyes and telling him his mother couldn't hold on to a job. I'm afraid of letting him see an eviction notice taped to the door. That's my fear. Not you." And then the thing Elise never expected happened. Dante Caruso laughed. Not a sneer. Not the cruel laugh she'd braced herself for. It was a laugh of surprise, almost of admiration. "Get back in the car, Mrs. Harmon. Elise blinked. Am I fired? Dante didn't answer. He only turned and walked to the rear door of the Rolls Royce, opened it, and sat inside. Elise stood there for another second, the rain still crashing down, not sure what had just happened. Then she returned to the driver's seat. They drove off in silence. Elise stared straight ahead, her hands tight on the wheel. Every so often she glanced in the rearview mirror and caught Dante watching her. His eyes were no longer angry, not warm either. They were something she couldn't read. She didn't know whether she'd just been spared, or whether she was being led somewhere worse than death. Elise sat alone in the garage after Dante left. The Rolls Royce was parked neatly in its spot, the engine off, yet her hands were still clamped around the steering wheel, trembling. She looked down at her fingers and realized they were shaking beyond her control. 6 hours earlier, she'd walked into this building with the thin hope that a new job would save her and Noah. Now she didn't know whether she still had that job. She didn't know whether she'd still be alive tomorrow. In her mind, the confrontation in the rain replayed over and over like a film stuck on a loop. She should have kept quiet. She should have lowered her head and apologized. She should have done whatever he wanted and saved her pride for another day. A day when her son didn't depend on her. But she hadn't. She'd said no to the most dangerous man in New York. She'd stood in the rain and looked him straight in the eyes. And somehow, she was still alive. The phone in her pocket vibrated. Elise flinched, her heart jumping into a frantic rhythm. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. A message from Mrs. Bellini. Noah's asleep, sweetheart. He waited for you and couldn't anymore. He drew you a picture. You're driving a huge black car like a superhero. Elise closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Noah. She had to get home to her son. She drove out of the garage, across Manhattan, toward Brooklyn. The streets were quieter at night, neon lights blinking along both sides. But Elise didn't see any of it. She saw only Dante Caruso's face in the rain, his sudden smile, those unreadable eyes. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building in Brooklyn. When she climbed the stairs, the first thing she saw was the eviction notice still taped to her door. The bold red letters blazed like a cruel reminder of reality. 3 weeks overdue, 7 days to leave. Elise peeled the paper down, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her pocket. She'd deal with it later. Right now, she needed to see her son. Mrs. Bellini opened the door before Elise could knock. She was a 70-year-old woman with silver white hair and warm eyes. She'd lived alone in the apartment next door since her husband died 5 years earlier, and she'd become Noah's unofficial grandmother. He wouldn't go to sleep until he finished the picture, Mrs. Bellini whispered, gently placing the sleeping boy into Elise's arms. He said it had to be perfect, because his mommy has the most important job in the world. Elise's throat tightened. Thank you, Mrs. Bellini. Thank you for everything. You're a good mother, Elise. Daniel would be so proud of you. Elise carried Noah into her own apartment, past the empty refrigerator, past the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table, past all the evidence of how hard she'd fought to keep their life from collapsing. She laid Noah softly on the bed, pulled the blanket up, and tucked his favorite stuffed dinosaur into his small arms. Mommy. She froze. I thought you were asleep. I was pretending. Noah opened his eyes, warm brown eyes exactly like Daniel's. Was your first day fun? Elise sat on the edge of the bed. It was interesting, sweetheart. Is your boss nice? She thought of Dante Caruso standing in the rain, looking at her as if she were the first person who'd ever dared to talk back to him. I don't know yet. He's very complicated. Daddy was complicated too, Noah said, his voice thick with sleep. But inside, Daddy was still good. Maybe your boss is like that too. Elise's heart clenched. Maybe he is, baby. Mommy. Yes, sweetheart. I drew you a picture. Noah pointed toward the backpack in the corner of the room. Elise stood, took the drawing out, and unfolded it. Just like Mrs. Bellini said. A huge black car, a woman behind the wheel, a little boy in the back seat, and in front of them, a road leading toward a blazing golden sun. At the bottom, in the wobbly handwriting of a 7-year-old child, Noah had written, Me and Mommy going to Happy. Elise couldn't speak. We're going there, right, Mommy? Noah asked, his eyes already almost closed. The place with flowers and sunshine, and no more scary papers on the door. We're going, sweetheart, Elise whispered, her voice thick and breaking. I promise. I knew it. Noah smiled, his eyes fully shut now. You never break promises. Elise stayed there until his breathing evened into deep sleep. Then she pressed the drawing to her chest and let the tears fall. In silence, without a single sob, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Elise wiped her tears quickly and opened the message. 7 tomorrow morning. Don't be late. DC. Elise arrived at 6:55 in the morning, 5 minutes early. She hadn't slept all night, tossing and staring at the ceiling, wondering whether that message meant she still had a job or whether it was simply a summons to something worse. But she came anyway. For Noah. For the drawing with the golden sun. For the promise she never broke. A man was waiting for her at the garage gate. Tall, broad-shouldered, a face that looked carved from stone. He seemed around 40. Black hair cut short and neat, cold, sharp eyes sweeping over her as if measuring a threat. Mrs. Harmon. His voice was low, clipped. Yes. I'm Rocco Santini, follow me. No further explanation. Rocco turned and walked, and Elise hurried after him. They moved through the garage, into a private elevator, up to the top floor of the building. The doors opened onto a long corridor with gleaming marble floors and paintings that looked more expensive than her entire apartment. Rocco led her to a room and gestured for her to wait. Mr. Caruso is in a meeting. Wait here. Then he disappeared. Elise stood in the waiting room, not daring to sit on any of the leather chairs. She looked around, trying not to show how overwhelmed she felt. Everything here radiated wealth and power and danger. Voices carried from the next room. The door was slightly ajar, and Elise could hear the meeting going on inside. She knew she shouldn't listen, but she listened anyway. The investments have taken significant losses this past quarter. A steady, professional voice. The real estate market has declined, along with a few unfortunate decisions. I've prepared a detailed report for you. How much? Dante's voice. Cold. About 2 million. A long silence. Elise couldn't see inside, but she could imagine the air tightening. Keep monitoring it, Dante said at last. And Lorenzo, the next time there are significant losses, I want to know immediately, not 3 months later. Of course, Dante. I'm sorry for the delay. Footsteps. The door opened wider. A man stepped out, around 45, salt and pepper hair combed neatly, an expensive gray suit, a courteous smile set on his mouth. Lorenzo Vance. He glanced at Elise with a flicker of curiosity, then nodded a greeting and headed toward the elevator. Something about that smile made Elise uneasy. Too perfect. Too smooth. With 8 years of forensic accounting behind her, she'd learned how to spot people who were good at hiding the truth, and Lorenzo Vance carried all the signs. Mrs. Harmon. She turned. Dante stood in the doorway, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Come with me. Today you'll drive me to Long Island. Elise didn't ask why. She only nodded and followed. They drove in silence for nearly an hour. Dante sat in the back seat, eyes on the window, not speaking a word. Elise focused on the road, glancing at the rearview mirror now and then. She didn't know where they were going until the Rolls Royce stopped in front of a magnificent mansion set among rows of ancient oak trees. Long Island, land of old families with old money and old secrets. Wait here, Dante said, and stepped out. Elise watched him go inside, the front door opened by a uniformed servant. She shut off the engine and waited. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. She began to wonder whether she should step out just to stretch her legs when the front door opened. Rocco appeared and signaled her. Mr. Caruso wants to see you. Elise was confused. Which Mr. Caruso? She'd already met Dante. She went into the mansion, following Rocco through long corridors with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Finally, they stopped in front of a room with wide windows overlooking the garden. And there, seated in a wheelchair, was an old man, Gio Caruso. Elise had heard of him. Who in New York hadn't? The most powerful don in the city for 30 years. The man who built the Caruso empire from nothing. But the man before her didn't match what she'd imagined. He was older, weaker, his body thin inside a red velvet robe. The stroke last year had taken most of his strength, but his eyes were still as sharp as knives. Come here, young girl. His voice was rough, yet it still carried the sound of power. Elise stepped closer. Sir, sit. He pointed to the chair across from him. She sat. Gio studied her for a long time, his gaze moving as if he were reading each page of her soul. You're the one who talked back to my son. Elise swallowed hard. Sir, it's the first time in 10 years anyone's had the nerve to do it. And then he laughed, a laugh that made his aged face turn unexpectedly warm. Tell me about you. Do you have a family? Elise hadn't expected that question. I do. I have a son, Noah, 7 years old. 7 years old, Gio repeated, his voice suddenly quieter. How beautiful. And your husband? He died 2 years ago. A car accident. I'm very sorry. And he said it as if he truly was. So you're raising the child alone? Yes, sir. Gio fell silent for a moment, looking out the window. I always wanted Dante to have a family, he said, his voice distant. A wife. Children. But this life, it takes more than it gives. I took my son's childhood to shape him into an heir, and now I look at him, cold as ice, lonely as an island in the ocean. Sometimes I wonder whether I made an heir or a monster. Elise didn't know what to say. She'd never heard a Mafia boss speak of his son with such sadness. You know, Gio turned back to her. Dante doesn't bring anyone here. Never. But he brought you. A new driver who's worked one day. He tilted his head. Why do you think that is? Elise shook her head. I don't know, sir. Gio smiled, mysterious. Maybe he doesn't know either. Elise couldn't see it. But outside the door, Dante stood in the shadows, quietly watching the conversation. His father had never spoken warmly to any employee, never asked about their families, never smiled at them like this. He didn't understand why he'd brought this woman here. He only knew that this morning, when he thought about visiting his father, he wanted her here. When Elise stood to leave, Gio caught her hand. His hand was old, trembling, but there was still strength inside it. Take care of my son, young girl. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. He's more broken than he lets the world see. 2 weeks passed. Elise slowly settled into the rhythm of her new life. Every morning she got up at 5, made breakfast for Noah, took him to Mrs. Bellini's, then drove to Dante's building before 7. She picked him up, drove him to meetings all over the city, waited for hours in the car, then drove him back. Over and over, steady as a machine. But something had changed. Dante was still quiet, still spent most of the time in the car looking out the window or reading documents. But he wasn't as cold as he'd been on the first day. Now and then, he'd ask a few clipped questions. How's Noah? Has the boy stopped coughing? Have you managed to pay the rent yet? Small questions. Nothing important, and yet they showed he was listening, paying attention. And that confused Elise more than any icy order ever could. Her first paycheck had let her catch up on the rent. The eviction notice no longer haunted her. Noah had enough food, and she could buy him new shoes when the old ones wore thin. Life was getting better. But Elise was an observer. 8 years as a forensic accountant had taught her how to see what others missed, and she began to notice things that didn't sit right. Lorenzo Vance, the CFO with the perfect smile and the expensive suits. He often held private meetings with people Elise had never seen before, men in dark coats with cold eyes who never nodded hello. Those meetings always happened when Dante was away, and Lorenzo always found a way to stay at the office later than everyone else. Elise didn't think much of it. Not her business. She was only the driver. Until that night, she'd already made it home, held Noah until he fell asleep, told him a fairy tale, and only then realized she'd left her phone in the car. Her phone held photos of Noah. It held messages from Daniel she still kept from before he died. She couldn't leave it overnight in the garage. At 11 that night, Elise went back to the building. The garage was almost empty, with only a few cars belonging to the night security staff. She walked quickly to the Rolls Royce, opened the door, and searched for her phone in the seat gap. There it was. She was about to turn and leave when she heard voices, soft voices, as if the speaker didn't want anyone to hear. Elise froze. Every survival instinct in her told her to leave right then. But curiosity, or maybe 8 years of investigation, held her in place. She slipped into the shadow behind a concrete pillar and looked toward the source of the sound. Lorenzo. He was standing beside a black car, speaking with a man Elise had never seen. The man handed Lorenzo a thick envelope. Lorenzo took it, opened it to check, then nodded with satisfaction. They spoke in low tones, and Elise caught only a few scattered words. Before the end of the month, Caruso won't know. Everything's been arranged. Elise's heart hammered. In her chest, she held her breath, not daring to move. If they discovered she was here, she didn't know what would happen, and she didn't want to know. Lorenzo and the stranger exchanged a few more words, then shook hands. The man got into his car and drove away. Lorenzo watched him for a moment, then turned toward the elevator, the thick envelope still in his hand. He walked right past where Elise was hiding. She stopped breathing, her heart nearly stalling. 1 second, 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Lorenzo didn't glance her way. He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Elise stayed there another 5 minutes, not daring to move. When she was sure she was safe, she slipped out of the garage, got into her own car, and drove away. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to pull over twice just to breathe. When she finally got home, she sat in the car and stared into the dark. Caruso won't know. The words rang in her head like an alarm bell. She remembered the meeting she'd accidentally overheard on her second day. Lorenzo reporting investment losses. $2 million. Dante had looked at him with suspicion. And today, Elise had accidentally seen Lorenzo's computer screen as he opened his office door. Just a flash, but long enough for her to recognize that the figures on the screen didn't match what Lorenzo had reported in the meeting. Not even close. With 8 years of forensic accounting behind her, Elise knew the signs of fraud when she saw them, and everything around Lorenzo Vance screamed the same 2 words: fraud. What was she supposed to do? Tell Dante. But what proof did she have? A few numbers she'd glimpsed. A conversation she'd overheard in the dark. Lorenzo had been the Caruso family's CFO for more than 20 years. Elise was only a new driver 2 weeks into the job. Who would believe her? And yet she couldn't look away. Not after Gio's words. Take care of my son. He's more broken than he lets the world see. Elise closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. She knew what she was doing, and she knew that if she was caught, she would die. But she decided anyway. She would investigate quietly. She would find the truth. She would protect the man who had given her a second chance at life. Elise Harmon didn't know that night she had stepped into a game of life and death. One Saturday afternoon, Elise's phone buzzed as she was getting her uniform ready. Mrs. Bellini's number. Elise answered and heard the old woman coughing on the other end. Elise, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I've got a bad cold. I've had a fever since last night. I can't watch Noah today. Elise's heart sank. Today was Saturday, but Dante had an important meeting in Manhattan. He'd stressed that she had to be there on time, not late by even a minute. She couldn't miss work. Not today. Rest, Mrs. Bellini. Don't worry. I'll figure it out. She hung up and looked around her small apartment. There was no one else. No family in New York. No close friends she could call at the last second. Just her and Noah. Mom, where are we going today? Noah ran out of the bedroom, dinosaur backpack on his shoulders, eyes bright. She looked at her son, then at the clock. There was no other choice. You're coming to work with me today. Noah's eyes went wide. Really? I get to see the big black car. I get to meet your boss. Elise tried to smile. You'll sit still in the waiting room and draw, okay? Quiet as a mouse. No wandering. I'll come back for you very quickly. I promise. She hoped this would be fine. She hoped Dante wouldn't find out. At the building, Elise brought Noah through the back way, avoiding eyes. She found a small waiting room on a lower floor, where employees usually ate lunch. The room was empty on Saturdays. Sit here, sweetheart. She set down his backpack, pulled out paper and colored pencils. Draw something for me. I'll be back in a few hours. Mom, what should I draw? Anything you want, but remember, stay put. Don't go anywhere. Promise me. I promise. Elise kissed his forehead, then hurried down to the garage to get the car. For the next 2 hours, she drove Dante to the meeting in Midtown Manhattan, waited outside, then drove him back. She tried to focus, but her mind wouldn't stop circling around Noah. Was he staying put? Had anyone noticed? She was driving back toward the building when her phone buzzed. Rocco's number. Mrs. Harmon. Yes, your son. The boy is in Mr. Caruso's office. Elise's blood went cold. She nearly hit the brake on the highway. In the back seat, Dante lifted his eyes from his papers and looked at her in the rearview mirror. What is it? Elise didn't know what to say. Her mouth went dry. My son. Mr. Caruso, I can explain. Drive back, now. Dante's voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cold either. It was simply an order. Elise drove as fast as she could without breaking traffic laws. 20 minutes stretched like 20 years. When the car stopped in the garage, she almost leapt out and ran for the elevator. Dante followed behind, his steps steady. She hurried down the corridor to the door of Dante's office. The door was open, and the sight inside stopped her cold. Noah was sitting in Dante's expensive leather chair, the chair no one was allowed to sit in except its owner. The boy swung his legs, too short to reach the floor, completely absorbed in the aquarium in the corner. Dante stood nearby with his arms folded, looking at the child with an expression Elise had never seen on him before. Confusion. As if he didn't know what to do with this small living creature. "Mom," Noah jumped down when he saw her. "Mr. Dante's office is awesome. He's got a fish tank. He's got Nemo fish too. I asked him what the fish's name was, but he said he hasn't named it. Can you believe that? Who doesn't name their fish?" Elise crouched and held Noah by the shoulders. "Noah, I told you to stay put. You promised me." "I did stay put." Noah pouted, "but I had to go to the bathroom. Then I got lost. Then I found this office. The door was open, Mom." Elise closed her eyes, fighting panic down. She stood, turned to Dante, bracing for fury. "Mr. Caruso, I'm so sorry. My babysitter is sick, and I had no one else. I know this is unprofessional. If you want to fire me, I completely understand." She waited for shouting, waited for the order to get out, but Dante only looked at the boy, then at her. "The boy is fine. You're not angry." "I didn't say that." Dante frowned. But the boy didn't break anything. He only asked a lot of questions. Noah walked up beside Dante and tipped his face up. "Mom said you're complicated." "What does complicated mean?" Dante blinked. For the first time, Elise saw the most powerful man in New York not know how to answer. "It means hard to understand." "Oh," Noah tilted his head, thinking. "My dad was complicated too, but he still hugged me warm." "Do you hug warm?" Silence. Dante stared at him as if Noah had asked for the secret of the universe. I don't hug anyone." "Why not?" "I don't know how." Noah frowned, so serious it was almost funny. "You don't know how to hug. That's easy. I'll teach you." And before Elise could stop him, Noah stepped forward, wrapped his small arms around Dante's leg, and squeezed. "Like this. You just put your hand on their head and hold them close. That's a hug." Dante stood perfectly still. His body went rigid as stone. He looked down at the boy hugging his leg, then looked at Elise with a face completely lost. Elise didn't know what to do either. She could only stand there, holding her breath. Then, slowly, very slowly, Dante's hand lowered. He placed his palm on Noah's head, gentle, awkward, as if he were afraid he might break something precious. "You did it!" Noah looked up, grinning. "See, easy." Elise watched what was happening, and tears rose before she could stop them. She saw Dante Caruso, the Stone King, the man all of New York feared, standing there with his hand resting on the head of a 7-year-old boy. And on Dante's face was something she'd never seen before. Not coldness, not anger. Something cracked open, as if the thick ice he'd built for so many years was splintering under the small arms of a child. For the first time in many years, something fractured inside the Stone King. After that day, everything changed. Not in a big, noisy way, in small shifts, the kind you could miss if you weren't paying attention. But Elise was paying attention. Dante began to ask about Noah, briefly, without looking at her when he asked, "How's the boy? Does Noah like his new school? The boy still like dinosaurs?" Small questions, disconnected, as if he had to push through some invisible barrier inside himself to say them out loud. But he asked anyway. Every day. And on long drives, the icy silence began to fade. In its place came conversation. At first it was only questions about work, traffic, the weather. Then, little by little, it went deeper. About life, about family, about things Elise never expected Dante Caruso to care about. One late night, when Elise was driving Dante home from a meeting that had run long, he spoke without warning. "My mother died when I was 10. Elise almost hit the brake. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Dante staring out the window, his eyes far away. Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, but in the end she still lost. Elise didn't know what to say. She only listened. "After my mother died, my father didn't know what to do with me," Dante went on, his voice low and thick. "He didn't know how to raise a child. He only knew how to raise a soldier. An heir. So that's what he did. He taught me how to be strong, how not to trust anyone, how not to let anyone close enough to hurt me." Silence. Rain began to tap against the glass. Elise asked softly, "Is that why you're so cold?" Dante turned his head toward her, his eyes deep in the dark. "I never learned how to be gentle, Mrs. Harmon. Gentleness will get you killed in my world." Elise kept her eyes on the road, but she answered, "Gentleness isn't weakness, Mr. Caruso. It takes more strength to be kind than to be cruel." She felt his gaze in the rearview mirror, watching her. For a long time. As if she'd just said something he'd never heard before. They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive, but something in the air had shifted. Some wall had begun to sway. By day, Elise was the model driver. Professional, on time, not a single complaint. But by night, after everyone else went home, she became someone else. She became Elise Harmon again, former forensic accountant with 8 years of experience uncovering fraud. And she was investigating Lorenzo Vance. Every night, after she put Noah to bed, she went back to the building. She'd watched long enough to know the guards' routines, to know where the cameras were, to know when Lorenzo's office would be empty. She slipped in, photographed documents with her phone, and left like a ghost. At home, she compared the numbers. What Lorenzo reported in meetings, what she found in the real records, and they didn't match, not even a little. Large sums had vanished. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were buried under vague operating expenses. Invoices appeared from companies that, when Elise looked them up, didn't even exist. Money was wired to overseas accounts with no reasonable explanation at all. Lorenzo Vance was stealing from the Caruso family. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. But she needed more proof that couldn't be denied. One night, she was in the accounting office, photographing a file, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. She quickly killed the flash, shoved the phone into her pocket, and pressed into the darkness behind a filing cabinet. The footsteps came closer, then stopped right outside the door. Elise held her breath. She could hear her heart pounding like a war drum. The door opened. A shadow stepped in. Lorenzo. He stood in the doorway, scanning the office. His eyes swept through the dark and paused for 1 second where Elise was hiding. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then Lorenzo snorted, turned, and left. The footsteps faded. The elevator opened and closed. Silence. Elise stayed there another 5 minutes. Her legs had gone weak. Her hands shook so hard she had to lean on the cabinet to keep from falling. That close. She'd come that close to being discovered. And if Lorenzo found out she was investigating him, she knew she wouldn't live to see tomorrow. She slipped out of the building and drove home in silence. When she reached her apartment, she stood and watched Noah sleeping, his small chest rising and falling steadily, his face peaceful inside his dreams. She knew she was playing with fire. She knew that if she made one wrong move, it wouldn't only be her in danger, it would be Noah too. But she couldn't stop. Not after everything she'd seen. Not when she knew someone was betraying the man who had given her a second chance at life. She couldn't stop. 3 weeks of investigation. 21 nights without enough sleep. Hundreds of photos of documents. Thousands of numbers compared, analyzed, rearranged like pieces of a dark puzzle. And at last, Elise could see the whole picture. She sat in her small apartment, Noah long asleep, her laptop casting a pale blue glow into the dark. In front of her lay everything she had found. Fake invoices from shell companies. Names that sounded legitimate, but when she searched, didn't exist at all. No real address, no real employees, no real business activity. Only hollow skins created to siphon money from the Caruso empire. Wire transfer forms bearing Gio Caruso's signature, but Elise had compared them carefully. The signatures on these forms held tiny differences, nearly impossible to notice unless you were trained. The slant of the letter G, the length of the final stroke. This wasn't Gio's signature. It was a forgery. And the money, millions of dollars wired to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts Elise couldn't access, but she could trace where the flow went. Every path led in the same direction. Lorenzo Vance. She ran the calculations again, hoping she'd made a mistake. But the numbers didn't change. More than $15 million. Over the past 3 years, Lorenzo Vance had embezzled more than $15 million from the Caruso family. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the stack of files she'd collected, there was an email folder, encrypted. Elise had spent nearly a week cracking part of it. What she read turned her blood to ice. Lorenzo wasn't only stealing money, he was selling out the Caruso family. Emails exchanged with someone using the alias B. It didn't take Elise long to understand who B was. Benedetti. The Benedetti family. The Caruso's sworn enemies for 3 decades. The war for territory between the two families had taken lives on both sides, and Lorenzo was working for them. The plan was laid out clearly in the emails. When Gio Caruso died, and with his health, that could happen at any time, Lorenzo would feed Benedetti inside information, a list of vulnerabilities, Dante's schedule, the locations of key facilities, passwords, access codes, everything, and Benedetti would strike, fast, ruthless, leaving Dante no chance to respond. In return, Lorenzo would be rewarded. Control over part of the Caruso empire after Benedetti took over. Money, power, safety, all the things he'd sold his soul to obtain. Elise sat there, staring at the screen, not moving. In her hands was evidence that could save Dante Caruso, or kill her. If she spoke up, Lorenzo would know she'd been investigating him, and with what he was doing, he wouldn't let her live to testify. She would die. Noah would be orphaned. A 7-year-old boy would lose both his father and his mother. But if she didn't speak, Dante would lose everything. His empire, his family, maybe his life. Gio would die never knowing the man he trusted like a brother was betraying his son. She remembered meeting Gio on Long Island, his aged eyes still sharp, his trembling hand closing over hers. "Take care of my son, young girl. He's more broken than he lets the world see." She remembered Dante standing frozen when Noah hugged his leg, his hand lowering, slowly, onto the boy's head. Awkward, gentle, as if he were afraid of breaking something precious. She remembered the conversations in the car, his thick voice when he spoke of his mother, the loneliness hidden beneath the ice. She couldn't let him be betrayed. She couldn't let him lose everything without even knowing. She had to tell him, even if it killed her. Elise stood and gathered every piece of evidence onto a USB drive. She would go to Dante tonight. She would tell him everything, and she would pray he believed her. She put on her coat, checked Noah sleeping, asked Mrs. Bellini to watch him for a little while, then drove to Dante's building. Late at night, the office was almost empty. Elise knew Dante often worked late. He would be here. She walked the hallway, her heart pounding like a war drum with every step. This was the right decision. She knew that, but it didn't make her any less afraid. She stopped at Dante's office door, raising her hand to knock. Then she felt it. A hand settled on her shoulder from behind. She went rigid. "Mrs. Harmon." A familiar voice, cold, calm. "We need to talk." "Lorenzo." Elise went rigid, Lorenzo's hand still on her shoulder like an iron clamp. She could feel the warmth of his palm through her coat, and yet it was cold down to the bone. "Turn around, Mrs. Harmon. We'll talk in my office." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Elise had no choice. She let Lorenzo guide her down the corridor and into his office. The room was dark, lit only by a desk lamp that threw long shadows across the walls. Lorenzo closed the door. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. He walked around the desk, sat in his chair, and looked at her with a calm smile that was frightening. "You're smarter than I thought." Lorenzo's voice was gentle, as if he were offering a compliment. A forensic accountant pretending to be a driver. Clever. Elise's heart raced, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lorenzo laughed softly, the sound small inside the room. "Don't insult my intelligence, Mrs. Harmon. I know you've been sneaking into the accounting office every night. I know you've been photographing documents. I know you tried to decrypt my emails." He stood and came around the desk, moving toward her one slow step at a time. "You think I didn't notice that night in the office? You think I don't know who was hiding behind the filing cabinet?" Elise backed up until her spine met the door. "No way out. I'll admit it, you're better than I expected." Lorenzo stopped less than a foot away, his voice still as mild as if he were talking about the weather. But being good doesn't mean being wise. He tilted his head, eyes on her the way a hunter looks at prey. "You have a lovely little boy, Mrs. Harmon. Noah, isn't it? 7 years old. Lincoln Elementary. Likes dinosaurs." Elise's blood turned to ice. "He rides bus number 12 to school. Gets off at the stop on the corner of Maple and 5th. Every afternoon, an Italian old woman picks him up. 3-story building, window facing the alley." Elise couldn't breathe. He'd been watching her child. He knew everything about him. "What do you want?" Her voice shook despite her effort to control it. Lorenzo smiled, the smile of a man who believed he'd already won. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget everything you saw. You're going to resign tomorrow, and you're going to leave New York within 48 hours. And if I don't..." Lorenzo tilted his head, his tone still gently horrifying. "Then I'll make sure Noah is reunited with his father." A deadly silence. Elise looked into Lorenzo's eyes and saw he meant it. This wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise. "Don't think about telling Dante," Lorenzo added, as if he could read her mind. "He's trusted me for more than 20 years. And you, You're just a driver, who's been here a few weeks. Who do you think he'll believe?" He opened the door and motioned her out. 48 hours, Mrs. Harmon. Don't make me say it again." Elise walked out of the office like a sleepwalker. Her feet carried her to the elevator, down to the garage, into her car. But she didn't remember any of it. She remembered only Lorenzo's eyes when he said her son's name. She drove home, her hands shaking so badly she had to pull over 3 times. When she reached her apartment, she went straight into Noah's room and sat beside his bed. He was asleep, his face peaceful, his arms wrapped around his stuffed dinosaur. Elise lay down beside him, held him tight, and cried, soundless, inside absolute silence. She could run. She could take Noah out of New York tonight and leave everything behind. Start over somewhere else, another city, another life, safe, but run for the rest of her life. Live in fear forever. Daniel's voice rose in her mind from a night long ago, before he left for good. Don't ever let fear make decisions for you, Elise. Fear is a liar. It tells you to run when you should stand your ground. Elise looked down at Noah sleeping. His drawing still hung on the wall. Mom driving the black car. Noah in the back seat. The road leading to the Golden Sun. Me and Mommy going to Happy. She had promised she'd take him to the place with sunshine and flowers. She had promised she would never break promises, but not by running, not by living in darkness for the rest of their lives. Elise sat up and wiped her tears. She picked up her phone. Her hand still shook, but her resolve was clear. She found Dante's number and pressed call. 1 ring, 2 rings. Mrs. Harmon. Dante's voice was low, sounding surprised to hear from her in the middle of the night. Mr. Caruso. Elise drew a deep breath. I need to see you. Tonight. This is about Lorenzo. Midnight. Dante Caruso's office lay drowned in darkness, with only the desk lamp casting a small pool of light on the polished black oak. Elise sat across from him, the USB drive between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. She told him everything. From the first night in the garage when she saw Lorenzo take an envelope, to the nights she slipped into the office to photograph documents, to the numbers that didn't match, the shell companies, the forged signatures, and finally, to the threat tonight. Dante didn't say a word the entire time she spoke. He only sat there, his face unreadable, listening. When she finished, he plugged the USB into his laptop and opened each file one by one. Photos of documents, copies of invoices, analysis notes with figures circled in red, emails partially decrypted. He turned each page, read each line. Silence. Lorenzo has been with my family for 20 years. Dante spoke at last, his voice low and rough. He's the man my father trusted most. He was at my mother's funeral. He stood beside me when I took everything over from my father. I know, Elise said softly. And he's been stealing from you for the past 3 years. Dante kept turning pages. His face shifted from doubt to shock as he saw the total. More than $15 million. Then he reached the emails, and shock became fury. Not the loud, explosive kind, the cold, smoldering kind. 1,000 times more terrifying. He's working with Benedetti. Dante's voice turned to ice. Yes. Elise nodded. They're planning to hit you after your father. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Dante understood. He stood, turned his back to her, and walked to the window. Manhattan spread beneath them, millions of lights blinking like stars. But Dante wasn't seeing any of it. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 2. Elise didn't dare move. Then Dante asked, still facing away. He threatened your son. Elise swallowed hard. Yes. What did he say? He said he'd make sure Noah was reunited with his father. Silence again, heavier. Dante turned back. His eyes were ice, but not the numb, indifferent ice Elise had seen on the first day. This was ice on the verge of catching fire. Ice hiding a rage that could burn the world. No one threatens what belongs to me. Elise blinked, confused. What belonged to him? She was only the driver. She didn't belong to anyone. Dante pressed the intercom button on his desk. Rocco. In here. Now. Less than 30 seconds later, Rocco appeared at the door, as grave as always. Mrs. Harmon and her son, Dante ordered, his tone allowing no argument. 24/7 protection. Starting now. Rocco nodded without a question. Mr. Caruso, I don't need. Elise began. You'll move into my penthouse tonight. Dante cut in, looking straight into her eyes. You and Noah. I can't do that. You can. And you will, Mr. Caruso. Dante. She stopped, startled. Call me Dante. His voice softened slightly. After everything you've done, I think we're past formalities. He stepped closer to her, closer than ever, close enough that she could catch the scent of expensive cologne, close enough to see the lines of his face in the dim light. You could run, Dante said, his voice dropping. Lorenzo gave you 48 hours. You could take Noah, disappear, start over somewhere safe. No one would blame you. Elise didn't look away. But you didn't run. You came here. You handed me everything you found. Why? She drew a deep breath. Because running never fixes anything. A beat. And because... She hesitated, then went on. Because I couldn't let them hurt you. Silence. Dante looked at her. Looked for a long time, as if she were a problem he couldn't solve. A mystery he couldn't understand. Something he couldn't stop staring at even if he wanted to. No one had ever risked everything for him. No one had ever put his safety above their own. No one had ever looked into the eyes of a mafia boss who was threatening them and said no just to protect him. Not until this woman. The driver with $23 in her account. The widow with a 7-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs. The woman who had argued with him on the first day and refused to step out of the car. Go get your son, Dante said at last, his voice different now. Softer, but still leaving no room for refusal. We have work to do. Dante's penthouse sat on the top floor of the building, overlooking all of Manhattan the way a king looks down on his kingdom. Elise stepped inside with her hand clenched around Noah's, and it felt as if she'd walked into another world. Everything here was so lavish it was hard to believe. Polished white marble floors, soaring ceilings with crystal chandeliers, paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the sea of Manhattan lights shimmering in the night. This penthouse was larger than the entire building Elise had once lived in. Mom, there's a pool. Inside the house, Noah shouted, letting go of her hand and running toward the indoor pool in the corner of the living room. He pressed his face to the glass, eyes wide as saucers. And there's a fish tank too, bigger than the fish tank in Mr. Dante's office. Elise stood in the middle of the living room, out of place. She looked around, trying to find something normal, something familiar. But there was nothing. Everything here cost more than her apartment. The sofa alone probably cost more than her yearly salary. From the corner of the room, Dante watched Noah as he ran and marveled. His expression was hard to read, not annoyed, not pleased either. Something in between, as if he were trying to understand how a child could pour so much energy into a space that had always been silent and empty. Your room and Noah's are in the east wing, Dante said, pointing down the hallway. Rocco will be in the room across from you, 24/7, like I said. Thank you, Elise murmured. Dante. He corrected. She nodded, not used to saying his name. Thank you, Dante. Late that night, after Noah was fast asleep in a bedroom larger than their old apartment, Elise and Dante sat in his study. Maps and documents were spread across the table. What you have is enough to get Lorenzo into trouble, Dante said, looking at the laptop screen. But it isn't enough to finish him completely. We need more. A hard drive, Elise said. In the emails I decrypted, Lorenzo mentioned a hard drive. He keeps all the original evidence there, like an insurance policy in case Benedetti turns on him. Dante nodded. Where is it? In his private office. There's a hidden compartment in the wooden cabinet behind his desk. I'll send Rocco. No. Elise shook her head. Lorenzo will suspect it immediately if he sees your men hovering near his office. But me. I'm just the driver. He thinks I was scared and ran. He won't expect me to come back. Dante looked at her, his eyes darkening. Absolutely not. Too dangerous. Dante. I said no, Elise. His voice went hard. You've risked enough. I'm not letting you put yourself in danger again. Elise held his gaze without blinking. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you I'm going to do it. Silence. Dante stared at her, at the stubbornness in her eyes. The unshakable resolve. The same iron he carried in himself. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. Dante exhaled, and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Fine, but on one condition. Rocco will be right outside the office. Any sign of danger, you walk out immediately. No heroics, no recklessness. Agreed. The next day, Elise walked into the building like she did every day, in her chauffeur uniform, her face calm. No one could see that her heart was pounding like a war drum. Lorenzo was in a meeting downtown. She had about an hour. She went straight to his office, nodding to familiar staff members as she passed. No one suspected anything. She was only the driver, Being here was normal. Inside the office, she closed the door. Her hands shook. Her pulse skittered. She went to the wooden cabinet behind the desk and searched for the hidden compartment she'd read about in the emails. 1 minute. 2. There. A small drawer tucked behind the decorative wood paneling. Inside was a small black hard drive. Elise pulled out her laptop, plugged the drive in, and began copying the data. A progress bar appeared. 10%, 30%, 50%. She checked the clock. Still time. 70%, 80%, 90%. Footsteps in the hallway. Elise froze. The footsteps stopped outside the door. 95%. The door opened. A man stepped in. Tall, thin, sharp-boned face with eyes cold as a snake. Frankie Malone, Lorenzo's most trusted enforcer. Mrs. Harmon. Frankie smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What a surprise. Elise stood motionless, the laptop still open on the desk, the progress bar at 98%. I was just stealing my boss's data. Frankie shut the door behind him. The click sounded like a gunshot. Lorenzo was right. You didn't run. He moved closer. Elise backed up until her spine met the wall. No exit. He'll be very pleased to know you're still here, Frankie said, his tone gently terrifying. Though I'm not sure you'll be pleased for much longer. He reached for her. Elise squeezed her eyes shut. The door burst open. Rocco. No words. Rocco moved like a storm. Within seconds, Frankie was on the floor, his arms pinned behind his back, his face smashed into the carpet. Go. Now, Rocco told Elise, his voice as calm as if he did this every day. Elise didn't need to be told twice. She yanked out the USB, grabbed her laptop, and ran. Ran down the hall, ran into the elevator, ran out to the garage, drove back to the penthouse at a speed that nearly broke the law. When she got there, she was still shaking. Shaking so badly she could barely press the elevator button. The penthouse doors opened. Dante was there, waiting, his face tight with tension. His eyes swept over her, checking for injury. I got it, Elise said, her voice trembling. I got it. She held up the USB. But Dante didn't look at the USB. He looked at her. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. For the first time, Elise went still, not knowing how to respond. His hold was strong, warm, like a wall shielding her from everything outside. Don't ever scare me like that again, Dante whispered into her hair. 2 days later, Dante called a meeting. Not an ordinary meeting. This was a meeting of the Kappa regime, the men who ran the branches of the Caruso organization, the men who held the real power beneath the family. The conference room on the top floor was packed with men, 12 of them, cold faces, dangerous eyes, hands that had done things Elise didn't want to imagine. She stood in the corner, trying to make herself as small as possible. She didn't belong here. She was only the driver, but Dante wanted her present. So they see the one who saved this family, he'd told her before the meeting. So they know what real loyalty looks like. The door opened. Lorenzo Vance walked in. He wore an expensive gray suit, his hair combed neatly, a confident smile on his mouth. He didn't know. He had no idea everything had already collapsed. Dante, you wanted to see me, Lorenzo asked, walking straight toward his usual seat beside Dante. But today, that chair was empty. Rocco stepped in front of him. Stand there, Dante said, his voice cold as ice. Lorenzo blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What's going on? Dante didn't answer. He only pressed a control button. The large screen on the wall lit up. Page after page of documents, number after number. Fake invoices, forged signatures, emails exchanged with Benedetti. The room fell utterly silent. 12 Kappa regime stared at the screen, then at Lorenzo. Lorenzo's face shifted from calm to pale, from pale to gray. This is forged, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room searching for allies. Someone fabricated these. Someone, Dante cut in, his voice sharp as a blade. You mean the driver, the woman you threatened to kill along with her 7-year-old son. Lorenzo whipped toward the corner. His eyes met Elise's. The shock on his face turned into pure hatred. She's lying, Lorenzo shouted, his face flushing purple. She's nothing. You're going to believe a... The meeting room door opened. Every head snapped toward it, a wheelchair. And in that wheelchair, Gio Caruso. The room seemed to freeze. No one expected the old man to be strong enough to come here. He hadn't left his Long Island estate since the stroke, but today he was here. Thin, weak, yet his eyes were still sharp as knives. A servant pushed Gio's wheelchair through the room and stopped it directly in front of Lorenzo. The two men stared at each other. One had once been a close friend. One had become a traitor. "Lorenzo." Gio's voice was rough, but every word rang clear as a bell. "I trusted you like a brother. I took you into my home when you had nothing. I let you hold my grandchildren. I placed the future of my family in your hands." He paused and drew a difficult breath. "And you betrayed my son, my family, my legacy." "Gio, please, let me explain." Lorenzo stammered, his face white as a corpse. "I don't want an explanation." Gio lifted a hand, trembling, but the command in it was unmistakable. "I want you gone." Silence. Lorenzo looked around the room, searching for support, but the 12 Kappa regime watched him with cold eyes. No one would stand with a traitor. No one would stand against Don Gio Caruso, even with him sitting in a wheelchair. Dante nodded to Rocco. 2 large men stepped forward and seized Lorenzo by the arms. Lorenzo didn't fight. He knew there was no road left. "Dante," Lorenzo tried one last time. 20 years. I served this family for 20 years. And you stole from this family for 3. Dante replied, his voice without a trace of emotion. "You sold us to Benedetti. You threatened a 7-year-old child. 20 years means nothing if this is how you end." Lorenzo was escorted out. The door shut behind him. No one knew what his fate would be, and no one asked. The room stayed silent. The Kappa regime looked at one another, then at Dante, then at Gio. Loyalty was affirmed again in that silence. No speeches needed. Gio signaled the servant to roll his wheelchair toward Elise. She stood there, not knowing what to do, her heart racing. The old man stopped in front of her. His trembling hand reached out and closed around hers. "Young girl." His voice softened, nothing like the hardness he'd shown Lorenzo. "You saved my family. You risked your life. Risked your son's safety. To protect people you didn't even know." Elise couldn't speak. She only stood there, letting the old hand hold hers. "From today," Gio said, his voice carrying through the room so everyone could hear, "you are one of us." A week later, peace returned. The storm had passed. Lorenzo was gone, and with him went the greatest threat to the Caruso family. Dante spent the next days purging the organization, removing the men loyal to Lorenzo, the ones who might still be links in the chain of betrayal. Each night he came back to the penthouse exhausted, but never too tired to ask about Noah. Elise was still here. Dante said it was for safety, but the danger had passed. She knew it. He knew it too. Yet no one mentioned that she should move out, and Elise realized she didn't want to leave. Noah had adapted completely. He treated the penthouse like his new home, racing through it with the endless energy of a 7-year-old. He'd named every fish in the tank. He'd explored every corner of the apartment, and he'd started calling Dante by his name instead of Mr. Caruso. One afternoon, Elise went looking for Noah and found him in Dante's study. She was about to call him out, worried he was bothering Dante, but she stopped in the doorway. Dante and Noah were sitting across from each other at a chessboard. Noah picked up a piece, studied it with confusion, then set it down on a random square. "No, not like that," Dante said, his voice so patient Elise almost didn't recognize it. "The knight moves in an L shape, like this." He lifted the piece and moved it slowly so Noah could follow. 2 squares forward, then 1 to the side, or 1 square forward, then 2 to the side. "Why doesn't it go straight like the other pieces?" Noah asked, his nose wrinkling. "Because it's a knight. It's special. Like dinosaurs? I guess so." Noah nodded, satisfied, then picked up the knight and placed it on a square that was completely wrong. Dante looked at the move, let out a small sigh, but didn't correct him. "That's a good move," he said. Elise covered her mouth so she wouldn't laugh out loud. She stood there watching the two of them. The sight brought Daniel back to her. He had taught Noah chess too. He had been that patient, and he had smiled at their son's ridiculous moves. But instead of the usual ache that came whenever she thought of Daniel, she felt peace, as if he were somewhere watching, smiling because their boy had found someone to learn from, someone to admire, someone to love. "Mr. Dante," Noah spoke suddenly, eyes still on the board. "Yeah, are you going to marry my mom?" Dante choked. Elise almost dropped the cup of coffee in her hand. "Noah." She stepped into the room, cheeks burning. You can't ask questions like that. Why not? Noah looked up, utterly innocent. Mrs. Bellini said when a man and a woman live together, they should get married. We live together with Mr. Dante. Dante looked at Elise. Elise looked away. Neither of them seemed to know what to say. Grown-ups have complicated rules, Dante said at last, his voice not entirely steady. It isn't always like that. Grown-ups are weird. Noah shrugged and turned back to the board. Is it my turn yet? That night, after Noah was asleep, Elise stepped out onto the balcony. Manhattan spread below like a carpet of light. A soft wind moved through, carrying the chill of an autumn night. She heard footsteps. Dante came to stand beside her without speaking. They stood like that for a long time, looking out at the city. Comfortable silence. No need to fill it with meaningless words. I never trusted anyone after my mother died. Dante spoke without warning, his voice low, as if he were talking more to himself than to her. 26 years. I built walls so high I forgot what was on the other side. Elise listened without interrupting. Then you showed up. He turned to look at her. With your stubbornness. And your son. And his ridiculous questions about hugging. She gave a small laugh. You're the first person in 26 years who's made me feel something. Elise was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about Daniel, about their love, about the plans they'd made to build a future together, and about the rainy night he drove out to buy medicine for Noah's fever and never came back. I'm so afraid to feel again, she whispered. Feeling means you can be hurt, and I don't know if I can survive it one more time. Dante stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I will never hurt you, Elise. Or Noah, he said, his voice rough but certain. I would rather die. She looked up and met his eyes, the eyes she once thought were ice. But now, in the city light, she saw something else, warmth, tenderness, and a small fear, as if he too were standing on the edge of something, afraid of falling, afraid of being refused. Dante bent down, slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. His mouth met hers, soft, gentle, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever touched. Elise kissed him back. She didn't realize she was crying until she felt tears running down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but the tears of someone who had walked through darkness and finally found light. Stay with me, Dante whispered when they parted, his forehead resting against hers. Not as my driver, but as my partner, my family. 2 months later, the call came at 3 a.m. Elise woke to the sound of Dante's phone ringing in the dark. She watched him sit up, take the call, and listen. He didn't say much, only a few clipped words. But by the time he hung up, Elise already knew. My father, Dante said, his voice hollow. He went in his sleep. Elise sat up and put her hand on his shoulder. She didn't speak. There were no words that could hold it. Dante stood and got dressed in silence. He would drive to Long Island, alone. I'll be here when you come back, Elise said softly. It was the first time she'd called him by the intimate word you use for a man you love. Dante paused at the door and looked back at her. A moment, then he nodded and disappeared into the night. The funeral was 3 days later. The Long Island estate was crowded with people. Dante stood beside his father's casket, his face stone. He was the Stone King, and today, more than ever, he had to be stone. Elise stood beside him, her hand holding his. She didn't care about the curious looks in the crowd. She cared only about the man beside her. After the funeral, Noah ran to meet them at the door. He looked up at Dante with sad eyes, then ran in and hugged Dante's leg tight. I'm sorry about your dad, Mr. Dante. Dante froze for a second. Then he bent and hugged the boy back. It was the first time he'd hugged someone on purpose. Thank you, Noah. Noah pulled a drawing from his pocket. It showed an old man in a wheelchair and a woman standing beside him under a blazing golden sun. Mom said Grandma went to heaven a long time ago. So I figured, now she's with Mr. Gio. He won't be lonely anymore. Dante stared at the picture. His mouth trembled. And then, for the first time in Elise's memory, the Stone King cried. 3 days later, attorney Helen Mercer brought Gio's final letter. Don't make my mistake, Dante, Gio had written. The woman who saved you, hold on to her. The boy who made you smile, protect him. They are your future. Dante led Elise onto the balcony. Manhattan spread below like fallen stars. Elise, Dante said, his voice softer, shakier. He dropped to one knee. Elise went rigid, her heart missing a beat. I never thought I'd do this. But you changed everything. Marry me, not for the empire, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Elise thought of Daniel, of her first love, and then of the promise she'd made to Noah to find the happy place. She had kept that promise. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Yes, I will." 6 months later, they wed at the Long Island estate. It was small, intimate, just the people who truly mattered. Noah, in a tiny black suit, carried the rings. I didn't drop them. Mommy's going to be so proud. 1 year later, an ordinary morning in the penthouse began with the smell of scorched eggs. Dante, the Mafia boss who could handle any hitman, couldn't handle a spatula. "Are you trying to burn our home down?" Elise asked, leaning against the doorway. Dante turned, deadly serious. "I'm a Mafia boss. I can absolutely handle breakfast." "Clearly you can't." Elise laughed. Noah came running down. "Again, Dad?" This was their life now. Simple, chaotic, full of laughter. Dante had shifted his empire toward legitimate operations, real estate, restaurants, because he had a reason to be careful now. He had Elise. He had Noah. He had a future. Dear friends, how did this story touch your heart? Did you see yourself in Elise, the resilient single mother who never gives up? Or in Dante, the man who learned how to open his heart after so many years of closing it? We would love to hear what you feel from the deepest place in your heart. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss moving stories every day. We sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch all the way to the end of this video. We wish all of you abundant health, a life full of joy, and peace in every day. Always remember that no matter how hard life gets, there is always sunshine waiting at the end of the road. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.